In a world addicted to speed, slowness is a superpower. I think there's a deep and intimate bond between slowness and joy. I think you can't have one without the other. Once you stop obsessing about the downsides of aging, you realize that as you grow older, many things stay the same and some things actually get better.
Welcome to the 1 Million Years of Joy podcast. I'm Dr. Andrea Benaker, your host, and my intention is to inspire you to find more joy in your life through the stories from our guests and the science on joy and purpose. Carl, welcome. It's such a pleasure to have you with us today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Carl, you're an award-winning writer, TEDx speaker, Ageism Disruptor, and voice of global slow movement. What inspired you to write your 2 books and to focus on these important topics?
Well, I've discovered now that all of my books start from a personal existential crisis. And that was very much the case with my first book, In Praise of Slow. So if we rewind a number of years, I was stuck in fast forward. Every moment of my day was a race against the clock, and I just couldn't stop. I had a sense that I was racing through my life instead of living it, but I couldn't find a way to put on the brakes until I had a wake-up call, and that's when I started reading bedtime stories to my son. And back in those days, I just could not slow down. So I'd go into his room at the end of the day and speed read Snow White. I'd be skipping lines. I became an expert at what I call the multiple page turn technique, which I don't know, any parent out there, you're trying to sneak 4 pages back. It never works, right? Our kids know these stories back to front. So my son would always catch me and say, "Daddy, why are there only 3 dwarves in the story today? What happened to Grumpy?" And this lamentable state of affairs went on for quite some time until I caught myself flirting with buying a book I'd heard about called The 1 Minute Bedtime Story. So Snow White in 60 seconds. And I remember thinking, hallelujah, what a great idea. I need that book now. Amazon, drone delivery. But then a second question came to me, and it was a real light bulb over the head moment. I thought, whoa, what's going on here? Are you really in such a hurry that you're prepared to fob off your son with a soundbite instead of a story at the end of the day? And it's one of those moments of genuine epiphany. I thought, whoa, I am racing through my life instead of living it. And that's when I decided I need to unpack this. I need to make sense of my own speed, my own addiction to hurry, and understand the bigger picture. And that was the first step to traveling around the world and leading into this whole slow movement.
Beautiful. And for those that may not necessarily be quite aware of what that actually entails, can you help dissect what
Sure.
that actually means in practical terms for our listeners?
Look, I'll start by telling you what slow with a capital S is not, right? The slow movement is not about doing everything very slowly. That would be absurd, right? I'm not extremist of slowness. I love speed. Faster is often better, but not always. And that's really the key to unlocking this slow revolution. Slow with a capital S is about doing things at the right speed. Musicians have this wonderful term. They talk about tempo giusto, the correct tempo for each piece of music. And that kind of gets at what slow is about. Sometimes fast, sometimes slower, sometimes in between. It's finding the right speed for the moment. And if you drill a bit deeper, slow is actually a mindset. It's quality over quantity. It's being present and in the moment. It's doing one thing at a time. If you remember when we used to do that, ultimately slow is about doing everything not as fast as possible, but as well as possible, which is a very simple idea, but an immensely powerful one. Because once you change the chip and arrive at each moment thinking, how can I make the most of this moment? How can I live this moment fully rather than how can I get through it as quickly as possible? That's a game changer, right? Which is why now, under the rubric of slow movement, you will find a million different movements in every walk of life, people coming to the party and saying, how can I do this thing better and enjoy it more by slowing down to the right speed? So some of your listeners will have heard of slow food movement, but there's slow sex, slow education, slow leadership, slow technology, slow medicine, slow educate, you name it. Whatever you do, you can do it better by slowing down to the right speed.
I love that. And I imagine that along the way, maybe you have heard criticism from some individuals that are actually struggling to implement slow movement techniques within their lives, how do you actually respond to criticism from those individuals that argue that slowing down isn't practical or isn't feasible in today's fast-paced world?
It's funny. I've been on this slow crusade now for good 20 years. And I'll
Mhm.
tell you that well, you use the word criticisms. I suppose the feedback that I get has changed. I think at first, when I
Mhm.
first began flying the flag of slow, people said, oh, that's impossible. The world's too fast. Slow belongs to the 18th century. Now I don't hear that anymore. What you hear now is we need to slow down and we need to slow down now. But, and there's a big but in there, but slowing down is hard. And that's inevitable, right? It's harder today than it was 20 years ago, right? We've created social media, we've ramped up the speed, we've got artificial intelligence coming at us from every angle. There's a lot of pressure to go fast, but that doesn't mean that slowing down is impossible, because slowing down may be hard, but hard is not the same thing as impossible. And more people of all stripes, in all walks of life, all countries everywhere are finding ways to pull the lever, to reconnect with their inner tortoise and do things better in a fast world by slowing down. This is what I call the delicious paradox of slow. That in order to thrive in this fast world, you have to slow down. If you're doing everything fast, if you only have one speed and that speed is turbo, then you're heading for trouble. Because not only are you going to burn yourself out physically, mentally, in the medium and long term, but right from day one, you won't be able to think as creatively, work as productively. You won't be able to listen, connect. You won't be able to be accurate. You'll make more mistakes. You won't be able to enjoy your life because you'll be racing through it. So there's so much to gain from slowing down. But yes, of course, in a world that deifies, venerates, and glorifies speed, of course it's going to be a little bit tricky to get to hit the slow button. But it's not impossible. And I see more and more people doing it in so many different ways. And I feel more optimistic today about the prospects for the slow movement than I did even 5 years ago.
I'm curious if you can share with us the connection between living the slow movement and joy from what you have heard from stories of people that have actually embraced the principles that you have spoken about.
I think there's a deep and intimate bond between slowness and joy. I think you can't have one without the other. And I think very often we misinterpret or misunderstand what joy is. We get it confused with thrills, with adrenaline, with excitement. And those can all be great too, but they're not the same, I don't think, as joy. Joy is something deeper, something more nuanced, something more transcendent, something more deeply human, something slower, right? To get to something approaching joy, you have to slow down. I think the first step to joy is living fully, is being in the moment rather than juggling 53 moments at the same time. So slow is the trampoline, it's the launch pad towards joy. And I've seen that in every kind of person, whether it's, whatever age group, whatever cultural background, that in order to tap into real, genuine joy, you have to slow down. Joy is not something you can download from Amazon. It's not something you can, buy in a shop. It's not something you just conjure up in the 2 minutes between your first Zoom and your second Zoom, right? Joy is something, it's something, I think it's like a byproduct almost. It's a side effect. It's something that just emerges like a beautiful butterfly from the chrysalis, right? As a result of living life at the right speed. And that's where slowness comes in. If you can slow down and live fully, live slowly, live at a human natural pace, you're going to find yourself just by default living more joyfully.
As I listen to you speak, what also emerges is the connection between the slow movement and purpose. In other words, how can we live more purposefully? That it's not necessarily about the speed at which we move, but rather moving with purpose and clear intention. Any thoughts on that?
I think, again, people, this is something you hear a lot nowadays. People saying, I can't find my purpose. I want to find my purpose. Where's my purpose? Going off to see therapists or spend a weekend off in the mountains, making fires in the woods and so on. And all of that can be helpful, but To me, much of the pursuit of purpose is done with a fast spirit. It's seeing purpose as yet another commodity or another good or another status symbol that we can just get, right? If we put enough money and enough energy into it. But I don't think that that's what purpose is. I think purpose is something, again, a little bit like joy that emerges organically. It takes shape slowly when we're living in harmony with our own selves, when we find the tempo that's right for us, when we're moving through the world in a way that is open, loving, engaged, meaningful, human. I think that's when you find your purpose. I don't know. Maybe someone goes off on a weekend workshop and comes back with their purpose. I'd be very surprised. I think that feels like the fast way. I think the best way, the most reliable way to find your purpose is to slow down, right? To take time to reconnect with who you are, to find your own rhythms, to listen to the whispers of your own soul. You can't do that if you're stuck in roadrunner mode.
Carl, let's now talk about your latest book that talks about aging. What are some of the key messages you hope your readers will take away from your book, Bolder?
Well, again, this book began for me. The spark was another existential crisis. I was at a hockey tournament, playing well, having fun, scored an incredible goal that I will be dining out on for many years. And yet, as my team got into the semifinals, one of the organizers of the tournament came up to me and said, "Guess what? I've been looking through player profiles, and it turns out you're the oldest player here." And it's funny. I mean, I knew I was one of the oldest. I mean, look at me right now. Gray hair. I'm not deluded, right? But to be the oldest just rocked me to my core, shook me to my foundations. In the blink of an eye, I went from goal scorer to granddad. And all of these questions began crowding in. I began thinking, well, do I look out of place here? Are people laughing at me behind my back? Should I take up a more age-appropriate pastime like bingo, maybe? And it was just an extraordinary moment. I suddenly thought, wow, how can it be that my chronological age has suddenly taken on this terrible power? This power to define and limit me. And I came away from that tournament thinking there has to be a better way to think about aging. There has to be a better story to tell in the 21st century about growing older. And spoiler alert, there is, right? I spent a couple of years traveling around the world investigating where we are with aging and longevity and drilling into the culture and social side of things. And there is so much a better story to tell here. I realized that I myself had been, through my whole life really, a paid up member of the cult of youth. But I saw aging as a curse or a punishment or a disease or even a form of failure, when in fact, aging is the most natural thing out there. We are all doing it, right? Whatever age we are, we're aging. We're all on the same journey. And what I want people to take away from the book is this. I want to move away from this dominant idea in the culture that aging is a chamber of horrors, that after a certain birthday, it's all downhill. Everything gets worse. That's complete poppycock. That's just totally untrue. Now, obviously, we lose things. Some things get worse as we get older. I mean, I play hockey. I can't run as fast. I'm 56, right? I can't run as fast or for as long as I could when I was 16. But the truth is that if you once you stop obsessing about the downsides of aging, you realize that as you grow older, many things stay the same, and some things actually get better. And that was the thing that really lifted my spirits researching and writing this book, is discover that there's a whole other side, a sunny side to the very human business of growing older, that many things improve. Our mood tends to improve. And we can go into some of these in detail, but our creativity, our social skills, all these things do get better as we get older, which is why, in fact, let's pull on that string of mood, right? One of the main tropes about aging, one of the most common ageist stereotypes, is that later life is depressing. Right? So if you think of the words we use to describe older people, it's cranky, sad, crotchety, grumpy, right? But actually untrue. Human beings follow what's called a U-shaped happiness curve. Starting high in childhood, we fall steadily till we bottom out in middle age, and then we bounce back up again. The adult group that report the highest levels of life satisfaction and happiness are the over 55s, which flies completely in the face of the dominant cultural narrative, which tells you that aging sucks, right? That you're going to get past your 35th birthday, maybe your 30th, you're going to be sadder, more grim, more grumpy every day. it's just not true, right? It completely runs against the evidence. So what I want people to come away from my book Bolder feeling is what I felt at the end of writing it, which was that rather than dreading the years ahead, to look forward to them. I'm genuinely looking forward to the years ahead now. And one of the ways that I've done that, because people are always looking for little tips, is to come up with a different metaphor for aging. I mean, I think the common metaphor is downhill, right? It's just, you just go slithering downhill on every front. I think of aging now these days as a bit like a video game. Now, I'm not a gamer, but I think the architecture of the metaphor stands up nicely. It works like this. So every video game has different levels. So I'm 56 years old. That means I'm at level 56. And I'm going to, in this time, for this year, I'm going to enjoy level 56 to the maximum. I'm going to gather all the treasure, have all the adventures, I don't know, seduce all the maidens, whatever it is, that happens in level 56, right? And, from time to time, I'm going to look back and think, I had a really good time in level 29, but I don't want to go back there. I want to get ahead, move forward. I'm wondering what level 57 is holding for me. And I think that's one way to reframe aging, as an upward surge rather than a downward spiral.
I absolutely love what you have shared, and I really love the gaming analogy that we can all implement to be more excited, looking forward, rather than depressed and stressed and have more anxiety. What I was curious to get your view on was aging in the workspace. When you're looking at some leaders that have, let's just say, reached a certain age level or maturity and wisdom, some of them are actually struggling to find opportunities within a professional realm. And ageism is very prevalent within certain corporations. It becomes a form of discrimination to some extent. What are your thoughts on that? And what can leaders do to prevent such things from occurring?
Very much. I mean, ageism is rife in the workplace, right? And let's be clear here, it cuts in both directions. Young people can also be penalized for being too young. So it hits all age groups. But let's be honest, at the same time, it falls more heavily on those of us in the second half of our lives. And goodness me, think of all of the experience, the understanding, the wisdom, the knowledge, the social acumen, all that stuff that we're leaving on the table when we push a 50-something towards the exit because she's 52, or a 61-year-old because he's sick, whatever, we're shooting ourselves in the foot. This is the ultimate act of self-harm, because actually productivity tends to rise with age, especially in jobs that rely on social acumen, as more and more do nowadays, because because our social smarts get better. We get better at leading, listening, resolving conflicts, working in teams. We get better at weighing multiple viewpoints, spotting those patterns that allow us to unlock creative solutions to difficult problems. And there's so many things that get better as we get older that make us a better version of ourselves at work. I mean, just a question for your listeners now, just for 2 seconds, think, if you're doing the same job as you were doing 5 years ago, are you doing it worse today than you were 5 years ago? I mean, that's highly unlikely, right? There's a very good chance you're doing it better. And yet the whole ageist industrial complex arrayed right across the culture, but hitting really hard in the workplace, is sending the opposite message, which is, okay, this person is on the wrong side of 40, what? Or the wrong side of 50. It's time to start pushing them towards the exit ramp. No, and no. We need, especially now as the population ages, we need to see the aging population not as a burden, but as a bonus, right? As something we can tap to fire up our economies and supercharge our workplaces, rather than putting people out to pasture when they're at their peak in so many ways, right? So yeah, that's the argument for it. You asked me also, what can companies do? I mean, there are many things we can do to take down ageism in the workplace. I think a good starting point is simply to mix up the generations. I mean, very often people end up in age silos within companies. So programs like reverse mentorship, anything like that gets people across the age generations talking to each other, that can help lower the ageist temperature in any organization. Why? Because nothing shoots down stereotypes better than getting to know the people being stereotyped, right? So get out there, mix up with different generations. We can also rethink hiring. Yeah. Think about the language you're using when you put out a recruitment ad. If you're asking for, I don't know, a rock star, or certainly a recent graduate, or someone who's high energy. An older person can be all those things, but an older person is going to hear those things, read that language, and think they are not looking for me. The deeper message in here is they want someone under 30, and they won't even apply. They're going to walk right on by your front door, and you're missing out on somebody who could be a home run candidate, right? So think hard about how you're portraying, you're running your recruitment process, and how you're portraying your company. If someone picks up a brochure or looks at your website and everybody featured there, this is a very common error as well. Everybody featured there is under the age of 40, right? Or possibly under the age of 30, because people think, oh, we got to have young people looking dynamic and relevant and all that. A 42-year-old who may have within his or her grasp the knowledge, the skill set, the mojo to take your company to the next level, they're going to look at that ads, or they're going to look at that website and think, I'm going to feel really out of place there. They don't want me, and they're going to go somewhere else, right? So just think about how you're landing in the marketplace. Think about how you're perceived, and think about how you're moving around the different ages within the company itself. So those are some starting points.
And in fact, many organizations currently have up to 5 generations working together. And I find that beautiful. What tips would you give to some leaders that are actually exposed to such an environment where you have all this richness of experiences and so on, but we often sadly still hear that there are discussions or sometimes tensions that emerge because of generational gaps? Any wisdom that you can share to help, let's just say, bring more harmony and joy within the workplace where you do have these 5 generations?
Yeah. I would say I would put one little point of caution here. I think people are very quick to silo off the generations and say, okay, all people born in this age group are like this. Everybody born in that group is like that. That is not true. That is one of the great myths of the modern workplace, is that the generations are all very different from each other. If you dig down into the data and do any kind of due diligence on what people bring to the party, what they're looking for in the workplace, how they want to be interacted with, and so on, you find way more variation within generations than between generations, right? That said, of course, people have a different experience, a cultural firmament and hinterland to fall back on if they were brought up in different generations. So that can affect certain things, maybe how people interact, how they talk, and so on, the language they use. So I think it's useful to have, well, I guess I'd come back to what I mentioned earlier, that kind of idea of mixing up the generations, making sure that you have multi-generational teams, having reverse mentorship programs, having coffee mornings where you bring people of different generations in the workplace in a very informal, low stakes setting where they can talk about what it's like to be 25, 35, 55 in this company. And just to get those conversations going, talk about whether they feel they're being held back by their age, whether they're unfairly advantaged by it, and tear down the taboo, get the walls down and get people talking. And I think that's always the best first step, is to get people talking.
And as you've traveled the world to give speeches and do your research, what have you learned about joy?
I've learned, well, first of all, that it's there for everyone. That joy, that's one of the things that's joyful about joy, right? It's not something that's there for the elite or a small number of well-trained people. We can all access it. It's there for all of us. We just need to live better lives. We need to live at a more human pace, in a more human spirit, in a more human way. And I think joy is there waiting for all of us. There are many ways to get there. Some people get there through, religion. People can do it through the workplace. There's joy to be found everywhere. I think that's the sort of, for me, the take home of joy is that you can find yourself slipping into joy sometimes when you least expect it. That's in a way, I guess I'm pulling on something I said a little earlier, that joy is not something that you buy or order or commission, right? I think you're best off trying to live a life worthy of the name and let the joy take care of itself. Because if you do that, it will take care of itself. You'll find plenty of joy.
But have you noticed any specific cultural differences that really piqued your interest as you've traveled the world?
Yeah, I do think I'm always loath to make cultural generalizations, because I think within cultures you find so much variety and differentiation as well. But I do think, if I'm going to make one sweeping observation, I think it's that, and this is actually very easily backed up by the science, right? That what really lights us up as human beings, what makes us happy and healthy, what brings us joy is human connection, right? It's contact with other people. And the opposite of that is loneliness. And I think this is one of the great tragedies, and really, I think epidemic is a way to talk about it, right? There's an epidemic of loneliness. And I think that is undermining our capacity to find joy, to find ourselves, to find each other, and to find joy as a result of the first two. So coming back to the cultural comparison, I think that Anglo-Saxon cultures are probably a bit more individualistic, a bit more prone to every man for himself, and a bit more lonely as a result. I mean, I grew up in Canada. I live in London. I do a lot of work in the United States. The United States, especially, where people, you know, and then you compare that to, say, Southern Europe, where there's more of a culture of staying close to the family, to breaking bread together, spending more time eating with other people at the table. Some of these small rituals that just push you into social contact, I think they inoculate you against loneliness, and they give you an extra springboard towards joy. Now, that is not to say that, you know, Italians are more joyful than all American or whatever. Of course not. There's so much variation. But I think there is a little kernel of a lesson in there for all of us, especially in the English speaking world, that you find joy. I think ultimately it's not a lonely enterprise. It's the opposite. It's something that you do together. There's a wonderful, round out here with a quote, an old proverb that I think sums up and brings together, in a sense, all of my work. And it's the old proverb that says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And I think it's that spirit of togetherness. We are social animals. It's being of service to others. It's putting your energy into the common good. It's giving back. That's what really brings joy to our hearts, I think. And that's what makes us human. So let's have a lot more of that, right? A lot more together, a lot less alone. And I think that will open the door to a lot more joy.
And as you look into the future, are there specific projects or maybe new book ideas that you plan to pursue?
I'm actually just finishing up a new project. I'm writing about status at the moment, how other people see us and our standing in the world and so on. I'm writing it for the BBC. So that's a big subject in my head at the moment. I'm not sure where that will go after it's a radio series for Radio 4 and BBC, which will be coming out in a few weeks. I'm quite interested in, I'm not sure if I would write on it, but I mean, I think the whole artificial intelligence is an extraordinary moment in history. Who knows where it's going to go, but it's also a reminder, I think, that as the machines are getting faster and faster now, we have lost, as human beings, we've lost the race for speed, right? we're just never going to beat the machines. So I think that makes the case for slow even more powerful and cogent, because what it says to us is that if we're going to remain relevant as human beings on this planet, we need to double down on what we do best. And what we do best is the slow stuff. It's listening, it's connection, it's tenderness, it's love, it's messy, slow creativity. It's all that kind of stuff that the AI, who knows, if the AIs get to all that, then it's game over. but if they don't, and they just carry on where they are now, and maybe in the next few years, where they're just doing a lot of things really well and doing them very fast, then I think it behooves us to carve out a slow space for humanity so that we can really flourish and find joy, right, through slowness. So I don't know. I'm not sure if I'll write about AI. It's percolating around the back of my mind at the moment.
And if you look back on your younger version, when you're maybe at the beginning of your adulthood, what advice would you give your younger self?
Oh, that's easy. I give myself 3 bits of advice. The first would be slow down. You have way more time than you think. The second would be don't worry about aging. Look forward to every year, whatever year it is, make the most of now. And then the third would be connected a bit to what I've been writing about status. Just worry less about what other people think of you.
All right.
Slow down, embrace aging, and worry less about what others think of you.
Beautiful. And any final thoughts that you'd like to share with our audience?
Well, maybe I'll share another quote. It's from Mae West, the famous black and white actress from, I'm going to say the 50s, but I could be wrong there, back then, who said once, anything worth doing is worth doing slowly. And I think that kind of gets to the core of a lot of what I write and think about, is that in a world addicted to speed, slowness is a superpower.
Well, on those beautiful words, Carl, it's been an immense pleasure to speak with you today. Thank you. And look forward to hearing about all your exciting new projects that you have shared.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure chatting.